Well, happy Thursday, live. My iPad is dogging just a little. I just refreshed the screen. So I'm going to know in a second if we're actually live or not. And I need my iPad working in order to see your questions. Well, let me do this. I'm going to assume we're live by now because Katie's good at hitting the on button and getting us going. Happy Thursday, and a week late because I was not available last Thursday. I had an amazing weekend. My whole family's in Chicago. My sister came up on Thursday, and she came up for craft camp, which we loosely called it. So while she was here, starting on Thursday, we did welding, epoxy, a little bit of woodworking. She did a couple epoxy projects. We shot archery. We went to the gun range and she shot guns. So it was a crazy cool weekend of, I think, pretty fun for her. She got to do a lot of stuff that she normally doesn't get to do. And it was really neat to watch her with the epoxy stuff because she fell in love with it right away. And maybe an hour into it, she said, I've got everything. I've got all this epoxy related stuff in my cart on Amazon. So she was going home and she wants to do that. One, with her kid. She's got a teenager still in the house. And then two, just on her own, she wants to start doing some of that epoxy stuff at home. So the weekend was a blast. And because she was here, I was actually picking her up at the airport when I would have been doing this a week ago today. We've got one question cooking on here, which is, does anyone have an opinion on what species of wood holds its bark better than others? And I think it's a great question. And what's pretty common there is, especially if you cut it round, what a lot of people call a cookie, or just a cross section of a tree. In the perfect world, it would be nice if the bark stayed on in many cases, if you're making that into an end table or something like that. So I think part of it is, when was it? So one, I'm going to answer this part of it, which is, I don't think that there's a species that's necessarily better than any other species at keeping its bark on. But it does have to do with the time of year that it's cut, and double check this to confirm. But I think the deal is that if the tree was cut in the spring when the sap is flowing, then the bark is more likely to peel off. If it's cut when the sap is done flowing, so later in the summer or in the winter, the bark is more likely to stay on. That being said, especially if you've got a log round, a cross section, you've got a cookie, it does tend to shrink away from the bark. That bark is a continuous ring, and as the cookie itself shrinks as it dries, it's pulling away from that ring. I've only had a couple of occasions where the bark has naturally stuck on. One was a really cool bur oak table that I made. It had actually been cut at my mom's house, and I made a table out of that for my sister. But in most cases, I do not have much luck with the bark staying on. But again, I don't see it as species specific, more when the tree was cut. Another thing I want to point out before we get going too deep is we've got a download available for you. It's called Sharpen Your Skills. So if you, where we're looking at the screen right here, chat roll is there. And if you scroll down just a little bit, it says Sharpen Your Skills. If you click on that, what we've done is compiled a bunch of videos that we see as great skill sets for you to have in your shop. So there is information in there about storing lumber and other stuff, general shop storage for your shop, changing a rough sawn piece of wood into six square piece, how to square up a board. There's lots of information in there that's really good. You know, it's really at the level where it's the building blocks of woodworking, and you need to be able to get that stuff right in order to be able to move on to other stuff. So check out that Sharpen Your Skills availability, that download. And like I said, lots of really cool stuff in there that's going to help you in a bunch of different ways. Then the other thing I'll talk about, again, before we get rolling too deep, and I'll mention this more than once, this Saturday, June 18th, 2 days from now, is a really, really big day. I'm hosting Meet the Makers here at my shop. So what that is it's an open house here at the shop. I normally don't allow visitors just coming and going here. So it's an open house day, and a lot of other content creators and makers from the area will be here. Some will be demonstrating, and some will be hanging out. Matt Cremona, Paul Mayer, Matthew Collins. A lot of individuals will be here hanging out. Additionally, Matt Coppersmith, Kevin Ewing, I'm going to forget some people, Donovan Cummings, are going, Casey Van Dusarts. They're going to be demonstrating. There'll be live demos going all day as well. I'm going to be running the Logisol sawmill. The demos are on a schedule of various things going on during the day. So if you're in the area, stop in 9 to 3 on Saturday. And we're not serving lunch or anything. You're on your own for that. But we are serving lots of information. It's going to be a really, really fun day. Okay. Ken says, I'm getting ready to buy a dust collection system for my new workshop. What advice can you offer regarding performance and features? So one thing I would do is on wwgoa.com, I would look, find that search window, the open banner on there, and type in dust collection. There's some information there. And then the other thing that's a real big deal is doing research. So I don't have at my fingertips like this dust collector, this to do, a science experiment kind of approach, but you need to take a science experiment kind of approach because getting good dust collection is a really big deal. Every tool has a different requirement for what it needs for dust collection. So table saw, which is sitting right there, needs about 400 cubic feet per minute, CFM, to get adequate dust collection. Bandsaw is a different number, planer is a different number, router table is a different number. So you want to start with those numbers tool by tool. The other thing that's really important is how you're going to set everything up. The drop in airflow per lineal foot of pipe is a significant number, and it's affected by, are you using spiral flexible pipe? Are you using hard pipe? Additionally, dust collection specific fittings, especially 90-degree elbows, Y fittings, those are made in a way that really encourage airflow or they diminish it less. If you go to a home center and you buy a 90-degree HVAC, just a heating elbow, it actually turns way too sharp a 90. I know that, I don't know why I remember this, but I do. You want the radius of a 90-degree turn for dust collection to be twice the diameter of the pipe. So that's a pretty significant, that's a big radius. So you got to do a lot of due diligence before you pull the trigger on your dust collector. And once you know all of that, you're going to have it. Once you know which tools you're hooking up to, the next part of that is going to be, do you work by yourself? So you only have to collect from the table saw individually. Then you can close that blast gate, collect from the jointer, close that blast gate. If there are multiple people working in your shop, that changes the dynamic because then you've got to be able to pick up from more than one tool at one time. Then where will your dust collector be positioned? Are you going to move it from tool to tool? So your connection hose is only going to be very, very short. Or are you going to do any kind of a central system where, again, that pipe causes a significant drop? So you have to have a significant dust collector to overcome the airflow and static pressure drop you get from running hard pipe and flexible pipe. So there's a lot going on. And I'm not, I know enough to know what I don't know. So I know that there's a lot going on in order to get good dust collection. I don't know enough to say, here's the answer. I know companies like Oneida, you can go to them and say, here's my layout of the shop, provide a drawing, and they will help you with which of their dust collectors, what kind of pipe, all of that kind of stuff. And my iPad went to sleep because I talked so long on that answer. Michael says, I've been told that you can reconstitute old, thick Titebond glue by adding water. Does that make sense? Man, I wouldn't do it. You know, I mean, I know everything is expensive. Every commodity is expensive. But if you've got questionable glue, think of the time and energy and money you're putting into a project. I would go get new glue. I don't know. I've never heard that you can reconstitute it by adding water. That'd be a great question for Titebond's customer service. I just would not take the risk because there are so many things that can go wrong with that. If it doesn't work, your project is going to fail. So I would probably just pony up and get a new bottle of glue. But if you're determined to try it, call their customer service and see what they say. But I think they're going to give you the same answer as me. In the dollars that are going into your project, think about what you pay for a 16-ounce bottle of glue and how many ounces do you use to put a piece of furniture together? Not many. So as a percentage of what you paid for that bottle, it's a pretty tiny amount. Bill says, would like to know how tight the hold down pawls on the table saw should be. So tight, let me get this out of the way and we'll look at the table saw. Tight is kind of an interesting way to phrase that because it's not something that you tighten. Let me get where I'm going here. And a little camera adjustment. So let's talk about what we're talking about. I mean, I wish I had a scrap of wood. I'll just use this. The pawls, or more accurately, anti-kickback pawls, are these things right here. So with this saw, I'm on a saw stop. Regardless of where I put the height of the blade, which is also affecting the riving knife and the position of those pawls, when I come under the guard, which then pushes me under the pawl is going to work. That's a funky camera angle. The pawl is going to work no matter what the height of that guard is. So it's not something, there's no device on here that allows me to tighten that. It's spring loaded, so it's always going to kick back down. And then on this particular saw, the position it was in when I first started is it was engaged against the guard up here, and that lets you take it out of the way if you need to. A good question would be why. That can be handy if you're working with something that's got a really delicate veneer on it. MDF does not. But if you've got a very delicate veneer, sometimes when the pawl is down, they can leave a scratch on your veneer. So it's not, really just what's going on here. Gravity and that much spring tension are enough to make that do what it needs to do. And which is to prevent kickback. The bottom line with that thing is it's a one-way gate. My office is such a mess. It's a one-way gate that allows the wood to go through, but not come back. So it helps prevent kickback. All right, I'm scrolling. I'm going to refresh. You folks are a little light on questions today. I'm surprised. So typically in 60 minutes, I can't answer them all. So I refresh just to make sure I'm not missing something. Joe asks, what's your latest project? Boy, great question. So for me, I'm still finishing the cedar strip canoe, which you've heard me talk about now for 2 years. I shouldn't even use the word finishing. I'm working on the cedar strip canoe. and I'm a ways away from finishing that. So the status of that thing is the outside has all been epoxied. I flipped it over, and now it's on slings instead of the forms it was on originally. And I've started sanding the interior. I haven't completed that yet. Sanding the interior is a way bigger pain in the breech than sanding the outside. The outside is all one big outside curve. So sanding was labor intensive, but relatively easy to do because you're sanding the outside of the curve. On the inside of the boat, it's all an inside curve. So one, you're constantly leaning over to get inside there. And then two, you're working over those curves that are concave instead of convex. So it's a much harder surface to sand. So I'm hoping that canoe is going to get completed and on the water this summer. This might be my third summer of saying that. It's a very, very, very slow process. And I'm not at it like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, because I've got other stuff I have to do. So it's like when I have time, I get after it. And then in my world of just other stuff I want to mess with, I've got a hatchet head that I want to make a handle for. That's going to be my new camping hatchet. And it was actually Nick Offerman is the guy from Parks and Rec, who's also a very avid woodworker. So he sells this whole package. It's pretty cool that you can get a spoke shave, a really good quality hatchet head, a blank from which to make the handle. Everything is there. And then you shape the handle, and I'm excited about shaping it to fit my hand, not just buying an off-the-shelf hatchet. So that is waiting to be done. And then in the video world, very soon, we've got 2 videos we're going to shoot. One is on live edge slabs. So I need to get ready for that. And I've got some material on hand. Hold, please. Right there. That whole rack is full of live edge stuff. So for that, a lot of that's going to be technique based, not project based. And then, so there'll be some coffee tables that come out of that. And then another project that I need to still develop is, and we'll do a video on this, is a portable camp kitchen. The idea with this sprang from, for the Boy Scout troop, probably 5 years ago, I made them new patrol boxes. So plywood boxes, I used SketchUp to make sure that everything that had to go in those boxes, which is stove, plates, pots and pans, wash tubs, paper towels, soap, everything that they need will nest very neatly into those boxes. And when I was doing that, it occurred to me, I camped quite a bit, it occurred to me that this would be a great thing to have as an individual, so that sitting there in your garage is your camp kitchen. And if you pick that up and take it with you, everything but the steak and the gin, did I say gin, is in that box and ready to go. So we're going to do this as a video project. So that's going to be, it's going to take a lot of development. I know when I did the one for the Scouts, which is, that patrol box was huge because there's 8 kids in a patrol. It took quite a bit of figuring in SketchUp to get everything, all the dimensions right. So it's big enough to take the stuff, but doesn't turn into this monolithic thing that's a huge pain to carry. So we're shooting that one, I don't know, not for a while, maybe not till September. So I've got time to mess with it, but that'll be a huge project. Okay. Ed says, I have a small shop. Would you recommend a HEPA air filter to clean the air? And again, on dust collection, I'm not necessarily your guy. I know HEPA gives finer filtration. That Festool vac right there, which is what I connect to my sanders, any portable power tool, that's what I'm running on that has a HEPA air filter in it. So I know the filtration is finer. If what you're looking at is a whole room air cleaner, air filter, I think you can't go wrong with HEPA. I don't know if there's a negative to that. The finer the dust you can pick up, the better. So I would, off the top of my head, I would say yes. I don't know if there's a negative to do with it. Patrick says, I'm attempting to cut out a pattern on wood veneer faces. Main problem, I don't know how to efficiently and effectively cut the pattern well. I taped a bunch of layers of veneer that I cut up to try and minimize the amount of cutting I would have to do. Then I used a Dremel to get rid of the saw marks. After separating the layers, there was a lot of chipping and a lot of saw marks were left. Any advice? Lots of arenas that I'm not versed in. Dust collection, veneer. So no, boy, I don't know. When people are doing marquetry, I know that they routinely stack veneers. FedEx is pulling in just in case we get interrupted here by a need for a signature. I know that when people do marquetry, they routinely stack veneers and cut multiple layers at one time. I'm not sure if that's a fret saw operation, a scroll saw operation. So I know they do it. I don't know how they do it. I would look for, I would Google marquetry because that's the topic in which that work is being done, and see what you can find there to help you out. Gregory asks, what's your suggestion to get a straight edge on a board if you don't have a jointer? So there are a couple things you can do. One would be, hey, do I need to sign for that or are you just dropping it?
I can just drop it.
Okay, thank you. One solution to that is using your router table as a jointer. You can search that on Wwgoa.com. Another solution is using your table saw as a jointer. I know I have done this on a video. I can't remember it's a video I did on a DVD like table saw techniques, or if it's a video I did as a standalone video. It requires making a special jig that goes with your table saw, but in the end, you have a setup with an infeed and an outfeed table, infeed outfeed alignment, much like a jointer or a router table, that gives you the opportunity, gives you the ability to do a straight edge on your table saw. So you could look for those. Those are both pretty cool. Then, of course, there's a hand plane. Another thing, another topic I'm not good at is doing it all with a hand plane. And I am not your guy for that one because I've done it. But in the end, I haven't done it enough to have the mechanical aptitude, again, the muscle memory to do it on a regular basis. Jackie built a workbench that folds out into a picnic table in 2020. It still looks okay, but because of the polyurethane I put on. When should I put more on or sand it down to do it again? Are you supposed to repoly it every year? So unfortunately, Jackie, like I'm not a dust collection or a veneer guy, I'm not a huge poly guy. I know people who own boats, so it's similar, right? You've got wooden components on a boat that get spar varnish, get polyurethane on them. That does have to get touched up. With polyurethane, I do know you can't just put fresh polyurethane over existing, and I think that's what you were asking. You need to at least scuff the existing coat. Otherwise, the new stuff won't have any tooth into the older stuff. It won't bond. Frequency, I would check with the manufacturer of your poly and see what they say. Because I think part of this is going to be, I'm guessing that if you're in Phoenix, where the sun is pretty brutal in the summertime, that answer is going to be different than here in Wisconsin, where the winters are brutal. But it's a different kind of brutal than sun just beating down on a piece of outdoor furniture. So one, it's going to depend on how it looks. If it still looks great, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't think you need to go after the finish now. If it's starting to look a little rough on the edges, don't let it get away from you, because then it's going to get rougher and rougher and rougher. But as far as frequency of having to do that, I think if you call the manufacturer, you tell them where you live, they'll be able to give you a recommendation on, figure on every X number of years, you're going to rejuvenate. Walter says, when I cut splines, how do I maintain their thickness the entire length? Well, let me spline that to you. Let me grab a chunk of wood and we'll go back to the table saw. I'll show you my favorite spline cutting jig. A bit of a move here. So it's very important that FedEx got here because I have a new to me motorcycle and I was waiting for a part for my bike, which was coming FedEx. And that's the FedEx truck that just came. So I think it's not a part like I'm fixing the bike. It's a sissy bar. The bike has a trunk on it, which has a quick detach on it. So I can take that off and switch it to a sissy bar if I want to. So that's what hopefully is in that box. So here's my thin part ripping jig. This is what I use to make splines. Very, very simple. Piece of MDF, doesn't have to be MDF. Some kind of man-made material is good. 10 inches wide, just like it says right there. The 10-inch or some even number is important. Real big deal, there's a little hook. There's a foot right there. So the way this is going to get used is the jig is 10 inches wide. So when I set my fence, I look at the pointer, and if I want to make 3/16 splines, I set the cursor on my fence to 10 3/16. Then the jig is going to go against the fence. The material goes against the jig, and that hook engages on the end grain. And then we push that whole thing through the blade like this. So then what one would do is test this. Always cut the slot first, the spline slot. So test this in the slot, and if it's too big or too small, you can make an adjustment to your fence. Rinse and repeat. I'm cutting them so thin they're falling down into the table saws. I was trying to cut an impressively thin piece of wood, but they're falling down into the table saw. I would have to have a 0 clearance plate on the saw in order to keep doing that. So that jig works great. And then, like I said, and that will keep them uniform in thickness down the whole way. Christopher says, more cabinet making videos. Thanks. Yeah, cabinet making is kind of my sweet spot in woodworking. So I feel like we're doing that quite frequently. John says, I currently don't have any hand planes in my shop. Want to explore using them. What can you recommend for what type of plane? Boy, so it's funny how things go. Like sometimes, we get like a plethora of finishing questions, a plethora of whatever, table saw questions. Today, it's a plethora of questions I don't know the answer to. So unfortunately, John, I am not a hand tool guy. So there are probably a bunch of qualifiers that somebody's going to want to know, which would be like, what do you want to become a hand plane person, where that's going to be your means of flattening lumber, straightening edges. That'll dictate what kind of plane you get. Really, the only thing I could talk about is, not in that drawer, is this block plane. This is a Lee Nielsen, I think it's a 110 is the number. And I use this all the time. It's a low angle block plane. And it's an amazing tool. Just it's easy to have in your apron if you need it for that. But to put chamfers on edges, to clean stuff up. Other than that, I just don't use bench planes, jack planes enough to say, here's what you need. I'm going to go one step further with this and show you coolicity. There we go. A little too much light. So this is not what this plane looked like when I bought it. I had that engraved for me. If you're interested in having something like that done, look up Jenny Bower, Bower. She hand engraved stuff all day, every day. So she did all of that work by hand. I'm washing it out with light. There you go. She did all of that work by hand. Jenny Bower engraving. Just absolutely amazing stuff. Since you use water-based finishes, do you completely clean your spray gun between coats? What's the difference between Aquacoat's water-based lacquer and water-based poly, and which do you use? So I do, if I'm spraying continuously, like I put a coat on now and I know I'm going to come back tomorrow morning and put another coat on, I don't clean the gun. Once I'm done, because then maybe I'm not finishing again for a month, then I completely clean the gun out. So I use Aquathane. Aquacoat's Aquathane is the product I use, and that one has got this incredible resistance to like everything. Mustard, ketchup. We did a video where put a bunch of these horribly caustic liquids on the finish to see if any of them would eat it, and it didn't. Grain alcohol, coffee, did I say that? So highly acidic stuff, high alcohol content. So anyway, Aquathane is the one that I use. Since you're light on questions, Ken says, here's another tool question. I'm buying a new miter saw. Research so far has me looking at the Capex, about Bosch's, DeWalt's. Not sure why Festool doesn't have a 12-inch. Other than blade size, what else should I consider? So I haven't tool tested miter saws since forever, so I'm not hugely versed in the market today. I am in love with lasers or some kind of line of cut indicator. So I backed away from lasers because the other technology of having a light up above the blade that then casts a shadow from the blade is also crazy cool. I've got a Milwaukee battery operated miter saw that has that technology on it, and it works great. It's amazing. And what's different then from a laser is if I change blades and it's a different kerf, I don't have to adjust the position of that shadow because it's a shadow. So it automatically adjusts on its own because it's a shadow. So I really like that on a saw. And then I'm looking at both saws happen to be sitting here. I'm looking at them to see what else. I would look for an independent tool test. Magazines like Wood Magazine still do them. I don't know if Fine Woodworking is still doing tool tests, but I would Google tool tests in that category because they'll have run the tools. And one of the things you can't tell by looking at it is dust collection, good, bad, or indifferent. What do reviews say about that? Dust collection is so important. So there are a couple things to look for there. Any experience with project design software? If so, can you share? Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of SketchUp. I use it on a very regular basis, and there's a version of it that's free. I use SketchUp Pro because the stuff that I draw ends up on Wwgoa. So it's because of the manner in which my projects are released, which means they're monetized, I have to use the Pro version. So, but there's a version of SketchUp that you can use for free. Very, very powerful software. There's a lot of information out there on it. We had a SketchUp class on Wwgoa. Over time, the software changed, so the class has subsequently been taken down because enough changes were made to it that it wasn't current anymore. So we're looking at redoing that class. But in the interim, lots of people have content out there on SketchUp, and it's a great piece of software. I'm routing a rectangle within one side of a board in which I'll insert an inlay. Trouble is the cutout isn't smooth or flat. Why doesn't the router cut a flat bottom like a groover dado? I would check your bit. I mean, it should. I know on the CNC, I'm routinely routing recesses, and they're flat across the bottom when I'm done. So is your router tipping or rocking? Is the bit, try swapping bits, because it should. Tips on drilling shelf pin holes in a cabinet. Made an in-between the studs cabinet for the bathroom. First take, I wasn't careful enough. The holes didn't line up. Second pass, I was more careful, clamping the rockler jig down, making sure front and back are properly marked. However, still needed to tape and shim a few of the shelf pins to keep the shelves from rocking. So what we do in classes, trying to think if I have a cabinet carcass, I don't, but this thing has dados in it. So let me grab a shelf jig. Because this thing with all the dados cut in it will tell the story. If this is your case side, and this is your shelf jig, what you want to avoid is a scenario where you're measuring up from the bottom, making a line, putting this on the line, then on the back of the cabinet, measuring up from the bottom, make a line, putting this on the line. There's so many opportunities to mess that up. Even if we skip the make a line step, if you put this on the cabinet and you're measuring up, what I look for when we use this is I want the dados in the cabinet first, or rabbets. Then a chunk goes in the dado. Put a piece of scrap in the dado. So now when the jig goes on the case, it has to register on there. And then same, when I do the back, it has to register on there. So part of the solution to this for consistency is making sure that you have a way to register the jig instead of just measuring or whatever. That make it so that it's go, no go. The jig is going to butt into something, butt against something, and it has to be in the right spot. And then I think you said you clamped it. Yeah, because you want to make sure it's clamped in place. Jim says, how about Nick Offerman as a future guest, like when I had Duresta on? Yes. So if you put me in touch with Offerman, I'm all over that. So, maybe we can make the connection here because Duresta's friends with Offerman. So, if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. So I need Duresta to connect me to Nick Offerman, and then we'll have everybody here. That would be such a blast. So it's something I've casually worked on, trying to connect with Nick Offerman. Not in a real, I don't know, haven't given it a lot of energy because it's hard to connect with somebody like that. But we'll see. It would be very fun. Sean says, I'm working on a project where some parts are going to be joined by mortise and tenon. Tenons will need to be cut with compound angles. Suggestions on how to mark and cut angled tenons. Well, so I'm trying to I'm thinking. So I did a table once that had the rails met the legs at 45 degrees angle, not temperature. And I cut those. I'm pretty sure I cut those on a tenon jig with the blade tilted in order to execute that. If you want to look that up, the project is called a handkerchief table, just like it sounds like, handkerchief. That's on Wwgoa. So the handkerchief table project has angled tenons cut on it. But yeah, I think that I thought I knew where the tenon jig was, and maybe I don't. But I think that the rail was vertical in the tenon jig and the blade was angled in order to make the cut. But that was a really long time ago, so I could be wrong. That table was actually made in my old shop, not this one, which means that's pre-2011. So I'm not sure, but that would be, if you look up that project, that'll give you some guidance on those angles. It says, I'm helping a friend renovate his 140-year-old brick front Victorian in central PA, recreating some of the corbels on the exterior that had rotted. What woods might you recommend? Leaning towards Spanish cedar. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's, the cedar would be easy to work. There's a lot of stuff that's weather resistant, mahogany, white oak, ipe, which would be very hard to work with. So I think any of those would be good candidates. I think we're halfway-ish, more than halfway. So again, a couple things. One, if you go down below where questions are going, down below the chat roll, there's a banner that says sharpen your skills. So what that's all about is under one roof, a bunch of videos that are on squaring up lumber in your shop. So changing rough material to material you can work with, squaring a board, shop storage solutions. There's a lot of stuff there that is going to do a really good job of moving you forward in your woodworking. So look at that, click on the link. That's going to give you access to a bunch of videos that we've got. And again, they're all compiled together, basically concentrated as the name Sharpen Your Skills is a great cover for that, is a great moniker, because it's exactly what it's about, is those little tweaks. They're going to make a lot of things in your shop go a lot better. Shaw, I read that one. My current project is lining all the irregular spaces inside a van using cherry, butternut, quarter-sawn oak. It's nerve-wracking cutting material that may end up not fitting. I've learned quite a bit from you and everyone else on this site. Thanks. So that's very nice. Thanks. Yeah, it's a couple of things there, like people who do cabinets inside boats. I've never done it, but I understand you can imagine there's not a straight line in there. Inside a vehicle would be another bad one. And then I had never thought of this until a friend of mine talked about it. He lived in a hexagon house, and it's just what it sounds like. It's a dome house, and the walls don't go straight up and down, and the walls don't go straight, east and west or north and south either. So cabinetry, everything for that was a very interesting scenario. Michael says, is there a maximum number of Ys or 90-degree turns I should stick to for dust collection? As few as possible. So again, it's very interesting. If you look at stats on dust collection, there's stuff like if you have 8-inch pipe, the static pressure drop is this much per foot. 6-inch pipe, 4-inch pipe. And then if you change to flexible hose, there's this much drop. And then a lot of what's interesting is they'll say like 1 foot of flexible hose is the equivalent of X number of feet of straight pipe. So that gives you a good feel for that. Similarly, every time you introduce a 90 or a Y, it's like having this much pipe. So you really want to look that stuff up. And off the top of my head, I don't know. I'm not versed enough in dust collection to know that. But the bottom line is you want to use as few drops as possible, as little flexible hose as possible, as few Ys and 90s as possible. And like I mentioned at the top, when we started, don't get that stuff from a home center buying HVAC supplies. Get it from a dust collection provider, because a dust collection Y is very different, and a dust collection 90 is very different than an HVAC Y and an HVAC 90. And then in dust collection, you never use a T. You can buy Ts for your furnace to move air around, you don't want to buy tees for your dust collection to move air around. Jody says, I have a 7 foot by 30 inch by 4 inch sealed slab table on my screen deck. It appears to be warping. How do you recommend flattening it? A slab mill is a great way to do big stuff like that. So there are a couple of approaches you could take. A slab mill is a couple of rails, and then there's a gantry that spans in between. And with your router, you go back and forth from rail to rail, rail to rail, and you're taking off the high spots. An alternative to that can be using a power plane or a belt sander or a hand plane, and then winding sticks. Grabbing the winding sticks. That route is very labor intensive and harder to do because you got to be really good with the hand plane or the power plane or the belt sander. And then what you're doing is you're putting the winding sticks on the slab like this. And when you sight through them and the top of that is in line with the top of this and they don't rock, you've made it flat and you've taken any twist or curve out of it. So that's another way to do it. 30 inches wide. You could take it to somebody who owns a Time Saver. Time Saver is a really big surface sander, and the 4-inch thickness, I think you'd be okay there. 37-inch wide Time Savers are not uncommon, 37-inch wide sanders. So they could run, start with a real aggressive grip, and then use that machine to flatten it, and then you're going to pay an hourly shop rate for somebody to do that for you. John says, I'm currently making an Adirondack chair. Where in the Twin Cities can I find cedar? I'd like to avoid big box stores and now sawmills or wood stores. So I get my cedar from Arrow Building. They're here in western Wisconsin. And they've got the 5/4 decking. That's what I use for Adirondack chairs. They've also got the 7/8, which is smooth one face, rough one face. If you watch the Facebook Live I did, I don't know, within the last couple of weeks making the planters, all that cedar came from Arrow Building. And then outside of that, in the Twin Cities more specifically, I don't know, I buy hardwoods from Metro Hardwoods and Industrial Lumber. I don't know if they sell softwoods like cedar, but you can make a call to them. Jeremy says, I recently did a project with hickory. I was told that when planing or joining to do thin cuts, I've got a grizzly spiral planer that seemed to bog down no matter how thin it passed. What's considered a thin cut or recommended depth of cut for hardwoods? Well, it depends. Grizzly spiral planer. So a grizzly spiral planer that's a lunchbox planer or big full-size stationary planer. I know I used to have in here a DeWalt 735, a bench top, and I took way less material per pass off with that than I've got a Woodmaster now that is a 5-horse stationary planer, and I can easily take off a 1/16 of an inch per pass with that machine if I need to, and then I lighten it up as I'm getting closer to being done. So that's a big, how much per pass you can do is a big, it depends on type of material and specifically universal motor benchtop planer or induction motor stationary planer. Hickory is really hard stuff. So I would, in the world of where you can be more or less aggressive, you can be way more aggressive with a birch or cherry, even walnut, hard maple, hickory. Those are going to fall into categories where you cannot take as much off per pass. So on a benchtop planer, it could be as little as a 1/4 turn, a 1/64 of an inch per pass on a real hardwood. 2, depending on how wide it is, because it's a surface area thing. If you're doing real narrow boards, you can take more off per pass because you're not asking as much of the planer. If you're full width of the planer, 12 or 18 inches wide, then again, you got to lighten up your swipe. Michael says, because of your cabinet making classes, I've started a side business of doing built-ins and kitchen cabinets for people. I owe my foundation to Wwgoa. That's very cool. What a great payoff. I teach in person pretty often, not as often as I used to. So the videos are my teaching in person, except that it's virtual. You know, the video goes on a DVD or it streams and then you folks watch them. So hearing stuff like this is great. Of course, when I'm teaching in person, I was just at the Mark Adams School a couple weeks ago. Teaching in person, you're constantly getting that feedback, which is very fun. So it's very neat. Thank you, Michael, for providing the feedback here, that interaction that I'm not getting because we're not live when you're streaming this in your shop at home. That's very cool. So let me hit on a couple things. So one, again, sharpen your skills, scroll down, bunch of free videos, check that stuff out. Then also, if you're remotely close to Western Wisconsin, Hammond, Wisconsin, open house here in my shop this weekend, 9 to 3 on Saturday. We're going to have hourly door prizes starting at 9:30. Lots of really, really good stuff to give away. We're also going to have demos running all day long. There are 7 different demonstrations that'll be running throughout the day. And then we've got a schedule for that. And then there's free coffee, which right there is a pretty good reason to come. The weather looks amazing. It's going to be in the 80s and sunny on Saturday. So perfect day to be outside hanging out with other makers, creators, content creators. Marvin says, I don't get notified for these events until after they've started. Any way to get notified sooner? Yeah, I don't get that. I've got an email account with GOA that's just like, you know, it's not my normal email. It's just kind of a side account. And I often see the we're going live email in a half hour come into that account 5 minutes before this starts. So I've passed this along before. That timing really needs to be different. I think maybe it's because we're sending hundreds of thousands of emails or however many go for this. Whoever's doing that, if you push the button 30 minutes before, a bunch of people are not getting them in time. It really needs to go a couple hours before. But I will bring it up again because it's a salient point. Carl says you are a source for hobbyists for polywood. Hollywood? I don't know what polywood is, so no. Gilbert says, I've never seen examples of pieces of staining. Sorry, I'm going to start over. I never see examples of wood staining of pieces of wood before a project is assembled. Wouldn't pre-assembly staining make more sense? Yeah, I do that all the time. And I'm confident we have it on videos. So there's there's some things to think about there. Whenever I can, I'll stain parts before I put it together. You don't want any finish on joints because that might interfere with the glue sticking. So stay away from the joinery areas. But no, it's a hugely efficient way. If I'm putting cabinets together and they're getting stained, I'll always pre-stain the interior faces pre-assembly, because getting inside there and getting uniform coats of stain and not blotches at the inside corners is so much easier to do pre-assembly. All right. Trying to think. Oh, in July, I'm pretty confident this is going to work out. One of the people who's going to be here as a demonstrator on Saturday, I think, is going to be here as a guest in July. And don't panic, Katie. I'm still getting the information from him to get to you and Jess. But he is a middle school teacher, middle school shop teacher. So I want to have him come and talk about kids in woodworking, how to involve kids in woodworking, what gets kids excited about shop. He runs a very active shop program. So I think it'd be neat to pick his brain about what to do to get kids more involved. And then outside of that, we've got the Sharpen Your Skills stuff. Scroll down, click on that, get a bunch of video access. And then 2, if you're in the area, Meet the Makers this Saturday, 9 to 3 here at my shop. And other than that, we have come to the end of the questions, which is okay. It's 5 minutes to 5. So we're going to sign off and see you folks here in July and at the Facebook Lives in between.